Open. All right, we are live. Hello, everybody. It is noon on Tuesday, July 13th. Thank you for being here while we're waiting for folks to click in. I'm super excited. I've had 2 weeks off of wonderful holiday vacation time with family out at the beach. And the first year we went, COVID hit. This year we went and a hurricane hit. So one day I'll get a beach vacation without some sort of disaster involved. But it was still wonderful to get some time away and wonderful to be back. So super excited to be here. Thank you for joining me at the table. And my name is Barbie Winterbottom. I'm super excited today about our guest. Many of you, I'm sure all of you recognize the person who is to my right on my screen. So I'm going to very quickly introduce our guest today, Justin Guarini. You may all recognize his hair. He also sings, if you didn't know that. On the side, he does this little performing thing. But anyway, so Justin was on the first season of American Idol. If you remember that, I know I do very fondly. I'm sure he's got more memories than we'll ever know about. And he was down to the finalists, and unfortunately, he didn't win. And you think about what that might have felt like, and we're going to get into that, and we're going to ask him those questions. But what is really amazing to me is what Justin has done since then and the beautiful life and career he has built. And that's what I really want to talk about is the resilience that he has and how he has now applied that. In addition to being American Idol finalist, Justin has a resume that is incredibly impressive, both as a performer and as a business person. And now he has recently added author and coach to his CV or repertoire, as it were. So welcome, Justin. Thank you for being here. I'm so excited to get to talk to you and share you with everyone who I'm connected with here on LinkedIn, and talk about your new program and how we can all get connected. So welcome.
Thank you very much. It's so lovely to be here. And I love that we met just a few, I guess, was it weeks, maybe like a month or two ago, I would say, on Clubhouse. And now here we're speaking together, and I've gotten into LinkedIn, and I'm just so excited to be a part of this community now and to be working with and talking to all kinds of people throughout this community. So I'm excited to have a conversation with you when it comes to confidence, when it comes to, especially when it comes to the HR field, which I know you're very passionate about. And confidence is a big part of what you teach the people in your line of work. And so I love the fact that there's synergy between the two of us, and I can't wait to talk about it.
It is, it's really incredible. So there's big topics that I typically focus on. In my work, I do a lot of one-on-one coaching with professionals in the HR and people space. And then I do a lot of consulting and kind of hybrid work with organizations. But there are 2 to 3 main buckets of topics that come up over and over and over again. Confidence, resilience, and how to bring your whole self to work, and vulnerability. Those are really like the big 4 areas that we end up focusing on. And there's so much overlap with your experiences in the world and how you've gone for it, and you've been really successful sometimes, maybe not so successful other times, and what it takes to be resilient so that you bring that confidence back, right? Because it's part of the core of who you are and how that shows up for you. When you relate that to folks who work in HR or in the people space, it is every day. Every day they're out there kind of on the front lines dealing with really difficult issues within the workplace that many people don't even understand or realize that we deal with. And we get beat up. We are dying on swords because we want to do what's right for our employees. We also have to make sure we're aligned with our businesses. So we're in this really kind of hybrid space that other employees aren't in. And our confidence can wane because you can only get beat up so many times, right? Before you're like, dude, I give, like, enough, I'm out. Yeah. And in the world of music and arts and performing, you go through that same kind of thing, right? Like you put yourself out there over and over and over again. And every audition, you'd think that after a while, you wouldn't have that same letdown after an audition when you don't get a role. But the reality is, you do, or at least I did when I was auditioning and performing.
Sure.
You get super excited about it. And then all of a sudden, there's the letdown, that roller coaster of emotional experience. So I'd love to hear from you based on what you've experienced. How do you do that? How do you tap into that resilience and bring it each and every time that you're on that stage?
Yeah, it's just amazing to think how, Shakespeare was right when he said all the world's a stage, right? And so when we think about any business, whether it's HR or performance, or you're an author, or you're just an entrepreneur or an intrapreneur, it really comes down to a couple of key mindsets. And what I'm hearing from what you're talking about is, when you talk about the auditioning, when you talk about the constantly having to go before a panel of people and be adjudicated, it's not that much different than HR, right? Because HR is constantly being beat up, it's constantly being criticized, it's constantly having to make adjustments, is constantly having to find new ways to fix the challenges that come up on a daily, weekly, monthly, quarterly basis, right? And so it's no different being a performer. And one of the best ways to get around that, and one of the best mindsets to overcome a lot of that back and forth, up and down, is to move from a place of scarcity to abundance. And then really the next level of that is prosperity. And so while I can't speak from an HR perspective, I can speak from a performer's perspective. And it's part of the reason why I wrote this book up here called Audition Secrets. It was my first book that I wrote, because I recognize that as performers, and tell me if HR folks are like this as well, because I have a feeling that might be. As performers, we're taught, trained, and educated to immediately feel as less than, as immediately trained to feel like, oh, we are just a cog in the machine. We are not in control. Our job is to go in and to prove our worth on a daily basis. And while that might not exactly be the same thing in HR and other walks of life and other businesses, there's an undercurrent there, I think. And so what I have found is that when we can shift our mindset from that scarcity, from that less than, to recognizing that we're on a level playing field. I am the project that I'm going into audition for does not happen without me. And I mean that almost like the royal me, as in the actor, right? It doesn't, they can't do their job. They cannot put their story and tell their story without me. And I almost feel like, well, HR exists for a reason, because the corporate structure cannot stay solid without human resources. It cannot stay solid without a system by which the people are managed, right? And supported, really, better, I think is a better way of saying that. And so when we recognize in performance that, oh, I don't have anything to prove when I walk into this room. I have everything to show. I am an artist who's walking into a room with other artists, and I'm going to bring something wildly unique, because I am unique just in my very existence. There's no one else on this planet who has had the same experience with life that I've had, that has the same perspective that I have, that makes the same choices and has made the same choices and been informed by those choices that I have. And when I walk into a room that way, I realize, oh, I'm in my own power. And instead of walking in like, oh, please give me the job, which is what most of us do in one way or another, you're walking in as an equal, saying, hey, here's who I am, here's what I do, here's my unique perspective on this role, on this song, on this story. Do you want to get on board with that? Do you want to partner with me on that? And here's the thing. No? Great. Thank you. Yes? Great. Thank you. There's no losing in that situation, because you realize that every time you get knocked down, every time you get no and the door slammed in your face, it's an opportunity to do one of two things: to either beat yourself up like we have all done,
Right.
and sometimes still do, or to say, okay, I learned how not to do that. I learned, okay, there's something in here. There's a lesson in here for me that the next time this happens, I can be better prepared. I can be more in my power. I can make a different choice that allows me to have a different outcome.
Yeah, it makes me think of a quote. I think I even posted it on my website that, losing does not mean failure, and winning does not always mean success.
Yeah.
And how many times have we taken the job or agreed to do the thing and almost instantaneously regretted it because it didn't align with who we were, but we did it because we were not in that abundance mindset. We were in that scarcity mindset. And when we think about interviewing for a job, and you go into that interview, which is the same thing as an audition, it's just it's facilitated slightly differently.
Sure.
But it's basically the same thing. And if you can go into it with that abundance mindset to say, I'm just here to talk about my life experience, what I bring, how I see the world, and how I think I can contribute to X, Y, and Z organization.
Sure.
It's great because it ends up being less of an interrogation and more of an actual conversation, which is what it should be.
Yes, exactly. And what happens in most interrogations? Well, the interrogator assumes you're lying and will beat you up. And more often than not, interrogations start with the interrogatee, person being interrogated, lying. And how many interviews and or auditions have we walked into, especially at the beginning, and outside, it's so similar, it's hilarious. Outside of the audition room or the interview room, we're sitting there and we're nervous, and we want to make sure we look good, and we got all our papers and our thoughts, and we're all like, oh, and feeling nervous. And then we walk in, and what does the person on the other side of the desk or table usually ask us? Hey, how are you today? And what do we say? I'm wonderful. I'm great. I'm doing so. I've never been better. We don't say it like that, but it's that sort of thing that goes on. The first thing we do, and that's why I made it a chapter in this book that I'm not trying to sell, but it's just so unbelievably germane to what we're talking about. We lie. The first thing we do when we walk into the room is we lie, and we set the entire tone of the interview or interrogation up that way. And it's just so interesting because I'm sure as you, as someone who's interviewed plenty of people, as whoever would be hiring or a person who's auditioning you, you're used to it, right? You're like, oh, okay, yeah. You put it in the back of your mind, right? Because everybody walks in that way, whether they're, auditioning for a major film. I can't forget someone who was a good friend of mine who's a great actor, was a reader in an audition. And that's the person who reads the lines with you behind the camera. And he was auditioning people for Superman, which eventually Henry got, I forget, I don't know how to pronounce that name. But he said everybody walked in, they were super nervous. I mean, these are like big players walking in, and they're all just as nervous as someone would be auditioning for their church choir. So when we walk in and we lie like that, yes, it's something in the back of the interviewer's head, and they just go, but what would happen if we walked in to an interview, if we walked into an audition and we immediately started telling the truth? And I'm not talking about speaking from a wound, trauma dumping. I'm talking about like just telling the truth.
I love that phrase, trauma dumping.
Trauma dumping. I wish I'd come up with it because
I'm totally stealing that.
Yeah, go ahead. I didn't come up with it, so you can steal it from me because I stole it from somebody else. And so, like, what would happen if we walked into the room and we just told the truth in a very simple format, where we just said, when they say, how are you doing? If we just said, you know what, I'm feeling a little nervous right now. I'm excited to be here. I really love this job. I love the idea of working, right? But I'm just feeling a little bit nervous. what a breath of fresh air that is for the person on the other side of the table.
Absolutely. And you're showing your authenticity. It takes courage to do that, right?
Yeah.
And
Yes.
one of the things that I've noticed, and you probably have as well, is either the higher up you go within a corporation or in the world of performing, the more famous, the more well-known you are, there's a shift that happens as you kind of move up these ladders. And when you get to the top of your game and you're like, I know what I bring to the table is solid. I have experience and years behind me. I have all of these things. You have a freedom to be whoever you are. And you're comfortable in that, right? And it takes people years to get there often. I mean, some people are born with that self-awareness and some people aren't. And it takes even longer, I think, for women to get to that comfortability space with who we are and kind of claiming our space and claiming our own. But when you see people who are really there and they're themselves,
Mm-hmm.
they dress for themselves.
Mm-hmm.
They're comfortable. They wear their hair however the hell they want to because they're comfortable. They're no longer proving themselves, right?
Right.
But it's the people in that middle range that I find where we lose ourselves and our authenticity. Folks in the beginning of their careers tend to be super genuine, right? Like, I'm here, I'm eager, I want to learn, I want to do the best I can, I'm super excited. Teach me, I'm a sponge. Yeah. They get a little bit of work under their belts, and then all of a sudden you start to see the masks and the putting on and trying to puff up and all of this. And if I think about when I was in music school in college, and it's when you're walking through the halls and you hear the people warming up in the hallway so that everybody else can hear them warming up instead of privately in a room where they're centering themselves, but they walk through the halls singing an aria from, Puccini, or whatever it is, right? It's the same thing in the corporate world. It's you see people putting on all of these airs, for lack of a better term, because they're in that space of I have to fake it until I make it.
Right.
And we've indoctrinated people into that thought versus doing what you said and just like being comfortable with what you're bringing and knowing that it's going to work some of the time. It's not going to work some of the time. And you haven't lost anything.
Right.
You're still leaving with yourself intact. With all the talent, all the experience, all the ideas that you had when you came into the room. So it's really interesting to me. And I don't know if you see that or not.
Sure.
Your level of performing. I mean, you've been in so many Broadway shows now. You're on TV. You're, oh, by the way, I will say this, my friend, is all you. It is all you. This is all your fault. All your fault.
Are you not sorry?
Right?
Yeah,
Exactly.
what I'm hearing there is it's a cultural thing. Now you can say corporate culture, you can say entertainment culture, because what's the hallmark of our beginnings of anything that we start is ignorance, right? And it's a not knowing, right? And I don't mean that in ignorance in terms of intelligence. I mean, it's just a not know. Yes, you're eager, you're there. It's idealistic. It's like the freshman congressmen and women who come in, right? You're like, yeah, I'm going to change the world. And then you realize there's a system in place. There's a culture in place that does not reward innovation, that does not reward on a grand scale, I would think, does not reward sticking out. And that's as much corporate culture as it is human culture, because across all cultures, religions, countries, there's this thing. The Swedes call it lagom. My wife, who's Middle Eastern, her great grandmother, I think it was, if anyone complimented the children or complimented someone, she would be up in the attic saying prayers, praying, because she did not want the evil eye.
Yes.
Yeah. right?
Yes. I
Right.
have a Greek friend, and he does
Yeah.
this all the time.
Yeah, she's Syrian, right? Yeah, exactly, right? I mean, the Italian, it's like
Yes.
my Italian background, it's like, someone gives you what's called the Maloik, and you have the horn, and like it's like the whole thing, and you don't want the evil spirit or the evil eye on you. You don't want to stick out. You don't want to put your head up. And then when we blend that into corporate culture, which again, or even in entertainment culture, it's just like, we want to stick out, we want to excel, but there are those people in the hallway who are warming up, who are trying to intimidate us, who are trying to push us down so they seem taller. And it's no different, I would believe, in corporate culture as well, right? People will scramble over each other's backs in order to get, a $10,000 to $15,000 a year pay raise. I have no doubt, and everyone's trying to fake it till we make it, because that book was written, and so I just would be interested to see if more people invested in their authenticity.
Well, it's a fear, right? It creates a fear-based culture.
Yes.
Right.
Yes.
And that's what, when I've gone into organizations and worked on culture transformation, whether it was with the HR team or with the entire organization or what have you, we conduct what we call listening sessions, right? So we ask executives their opinions about things. We ask managers, we ask leaders, and we ask people at all levels of the organization. And what is really eye-opening is that most of the time when there's these cultural challenges, it's because there's an underlying fear somewhere that we have to get to the root cause of the fear. And I think it's the same thing, whether it's corporate or auditions or whatever it is we're doing. We start something, right? If you think about the first time you performed, the first time I performed on a stage, I was in kindergarten.
Yeah.
And right, like I didn't know anything other than I loved music. It was a part of my DNA. It's my family. And so I did it because it was a passion and I loved it. We don't think about all these other things, and we're proud of ourselves when we accomplish something. And that particular story, I was scheduled to perform the children's duet from South Pacific, right? Kindergarten. I sang the girl part, the little boy sang the boy part. The day of the show, it was the end of the year concert. He chickens out and didn't show up for school. So they were going to pull the number. And I'm like, oh, the hell you are. I'll sing both parts. Right? I did it, right? And I sang the English and the French, and it was great, right? And I loved every minute of being on that stage. And I did for years. I didn't get nervous performing until I recognized that I was being judged for it. Because when we start off, we do it because it's our passion and we love it. And I think a lot of folks within the HR space, in the corporate world, they get into this work because they have a passion for changing our workplaces and our culture. And they love what they're doing. But somewhere, like we talked about earlier, you get beat up enough times that you start to pull back. And you start to put your armor on so that you can just flipping survive at times, right? So when we talk about your core confidence programs, and I know you have this brilliant methodology that I think is simplistic in its approach. And what I mean by that is you can remember it. It's not simple, but the methodology.
What are you trying to say?
Memorable, right? I know, right? I just defended Justin Guarini live on LinkedIn, everybody, but I didn't mean But I think we have to have things that are intuitive and simple to follow, because the work is hard. And if the process is also difficult to figure out, we're not going to do it. So talk us through you've got these 4 core pillars of your confidence, your Unshakable confidence program. And I would love for the folks in the HR and business community to hear about this, because it really can be, it's transformational when you go through this. And I want to also, I'll put a link in there for everybody so you can link over to Justin's site and check out what he's doing. But talk us through if I'm a new coachee of yours, what do we talk about? What does it look like?
Well, I think especially when it comes to HR, I think in corporate, I should say, not just HR, but when it comes to corporate, I think one of the biggest challenges that I've faced in my business, but also really in my personal life too, is I have made the mistake of trying to manage people, or to manage like myself, manage that, and but not manage process. So managing people is not necessarily the way to go, but managing process is another. And I understand this is a very dangerous thing in HR, because it's like, sure,
Well,
we're going to do another thing,
I
right?
was going to say, we manage process, we lead people.
Right,
Right?
exactly.
So there's the differentiator for you. So
exactly, especially in HR. But and in HR, that is very special, right? The process actually allows, and when you manage the process in a way that I really think it takes the people into account, it takes all those, it allows the people to lead themselves.
Right, you create the infrastructure that allows people to thrive.
Right.
And that's what we do.
What I talk about, especially when it comes to personal development, that sort of self-development thing, if we can start to manage our process, right? If we manage the process, that is getting into that mindset, right? Whether it's HR or entrepreneurship, being able to think, oh, okay, I need to manage a process here. I've been trying to work with these people and get them to do this, that, and the other, but there's a whole process that needs to be managed. And when it comes to process, I have 4 C's. And so core confidence for me is 4 key skills that you develop and apply to 4 key areas of your life. And so those 4 key skills for me are clarity, commitment, creativity, and certainty. So clarity, commitment, creativity, and certainty. Well, we can take those 4 key skills. Yeah, thanks. We can put those 4 key skills and take those 4 key skills and apply them to each of the 4 key areas of our life, which are our body, our spirituality, whatever that means to you, our relationships with our significant other, our children, our family, our friends, and then our business, which specifically for me is the making of money, the keeping of money, the growing of money, the giving of money, and then the bringing of value to the marketplace. When we can take those 4 key skills and apply them to those 4 key areas of our life, we begin to build a foundation of what I call unshakable confidence, because we are going to be tested. I mean, you've mentioned it to me so many times in our conversations about how HR people get beat up. Well, performers are no different. Entrepreneurs are no different. Authors
I
are
feel
no
you.
different.
Yeah,
absolutely. And so what I love to start with, because, we could spend days, like literally, days and days and months talking about this. But I love starting with clarity. And why clarity is so important to me is because if we don't, for example, if we're stuck in the woods somewhere and you and I were camping and we got lost, right? And yet we had this amazing GPS equipment or our phones or whatever, and we knew where our destination was. We want to get back home, right? And we type in the address for home. That destination, that GPS machine is worthless if we don't know where we are. If we cannot plot out where we are, it doesn't matter.
Yep.
We can know where we're going. We can know the exact coordinates. But if we don't take into account where we are, we'll never get there.
So let me pause you on that one to connect it to the work we do in HR. And I know most of our audience is HR or business leaders of some sort. This is the work we do when we say culture transformation, and everybody has this aspirational culture, right? We want it to be an amazing employee experience. We want to be known for having an inclusive workforce and equitable pay and all of these great things. So there's the aspirational culture that you see on our websites and blah, blah, blah. But you can't get there if you don't know what your culture is today. And this is where we miss the boat a lot of times. When I do culture transformation work, I come in and I'm usually not the first person who's been there trying to help them with this. I'm usually the second or third because it just hasn't worked yet. Mm-hmm. And what I find consistently is that we fail to identify what we have right now, where we are right now. And it doesn't have to be pretty. If it's not pretty, it's actually better, because then you have all this low-hanging fruit that you can attack and fix and work on, right? So let's not fool ourselves into saying, oh, well, our culture's great, when it's not. Just call it out, call it what it is, clearly define it, get that clarity, then you can move the needle. So I love that you can't get there if you don't know where you are, because you can't find yourself, right? So I love that connection.
Yes, absolutely. And it's so, again, it's just like, this is why what you teach and what I teach are so applicable across such a wide spectrum of business. Because at the end of the day, all business is show business. I love to say
it's true,
but it really is, right? Because you just show your value, you show that you're somebody who people want to work with, all that. So and so that being said, clarity then, when we begin to say, okay, we need to know where we are so that we don't do exactly what you're talking about, and what I call December 31sting ourselves, where we're like 10 to 9 to 8, and we're thinking, okay, next year I'm going to lose X amount of weight, and I'm going to spend more time with my significant other, my kids, and I'm going to write that book, and I'm going to write that corporate culture that we talk about, that's somewhere out there, that's the ideal that we put up on the website. When we don't fully understand where we are, all that's a fantasy, because we've been BSing ourselves up to this point, and we're just going to BS ourselves into the future, right? And that's, not to put anyone down, but that's what we all do it in some aspect of our lives. So what is the best way to gain clarity, which is where we start in the Unshakeable Confidence program? And that is determining the difference between truth and facts, right? What is the truth and what are the facts? And I'll say this, right? The truth shall set you free. And I think that's a capital T truth, but we walk around with a lot of little lowercase truths. And so for me, my truth is different than your truth, Barbie, is different than someone who's in the office over there, is different than our parents, is different than my child's truth. And a great way to talk about that, an example I love to use is, well, if you watch CNN, you have one truth. If you watch Fox News, you have another truth. Now, here's the crazy part. If you watch Fox News, you have one truth. If you watch OAN, you have another truth. If you watch CNN, you have one version of that truth. If you watch MSNBC, you have another version of that truth. So it's not a liberal or conservative conversation. It's a matter of the truth is relevant to wherever your focus is. Yeah. And so then when I think about the next example I love to use, which is, okay, I look at my bank account and I think, oh, I've been spending way too much, right? But then a billionaire comes along and they look at my bank account and what I've been spending, and they say, well, that's not so much, right? Truth, relevant.
Yes.
But if I had $10,000 at the beginning of the month in my bank account and then have spent $11,000 to give myself a negative $1,000 balance, those are measurable facts that a billionaire or me or anyone along any spectrum of wealth would see as a problem, right? It doesn't matter, right? So how do we really begin the game of clarity and gaining clarity? And that is by determining the facts in our lives, or the facts, like, as you said, in our corporate culture. What is the measurable data that you can find that will give you a baseline to start from? And I'll wrap by saying this, those, when we think about those 4 key areas, our body, our spirituality, our relationships, and our business, there is measurable data that we can find that is incontrovertible in our body, in terms of, okay, if we break it down into what the fuel we put into our body, right? There's measurable caloric intake we can put there. what about our workout? How much we expend, right? Again, measurable. And I'm not going to go down the whole spectrum, but in business, I would have my question for you really is when you walk into a corporate situation, the culture needs to change. What are the measurable, what are those metrics that you look for inside of corporate in order to be able to effect a factual change?
Mm-hmm. There's a few different data points we look at because, as you know, we can make data tell whatever story we might want it to tell.
True. Yeah.
So one of the things that I talk about in the programs that I coach with is the 5 imperatives, and it's influence and inform. And in order to influence and inform decisions, we need data. We have to combine that with our experience. What has our lived experience been? So this goes to truth or facts, right? The truth of your experience and what you've seen within this organization or other organizations where you've worked. And then the third element is your intuition, which is our superpowers that we far too often push down. But when you can combine data, experience, and intuition, you can get clarity around what is actually happening. So when you look at attrition data or turnover numbers, right? You're not in HR, so you may not use the word attrition. But if you look at turnover numbers, if you look at them one at a time, you can explain it away. Always. If you go to an executive who's had high turnover on his or her team and you say, well, what happened to Sue? Oh, well, Sue decided to move. Well, what happened to Tom? Oh, well, he needed this. What happened to this? What, blah, blah, blah. So you see all these easy to explain truths. But when you look at the data in aggregate and you're like, dude, you have an 80% turnover of leaders within your vertical here. That's a problem. So attrition data is one of the metrics we look at when we're looking at healthy cultures, because when people are working within a healthy culture, they tend to stay there or they stay there longer. We also look at performance and productivity and company financials. All of those things are better when you have a healthy culture. Oftentimes, when you see companies struggling financially, you walk in the door, you can feel it in the culture because people don't connect to purpose. They don't feel heard, valued, seen, and understood. All of those elements, right? Those are indicative of either a healthy or an unhealthy culture. So yes, there are definitely things you can measure, but we often go 1 or 2 layers deeper because what we don't want to do is treat the symptom. We want to treat the root cause.
Right. And that's so interesting. And I love how, and you're so right. And it just sparks something in me when it comes to, we can make the data show whatever we want to. I mean, right. Look at polls in politics, right? For the past 2 election cycles, the polls have been so far off, it's not even funny. To the point where not nobody, but very few people actually really, whenever I see a poll, I'm like, whatever, because I know that I, given enough time and money and resources, could call up a polling institution and say, I want you to ask this specific question of these specific people that I know are going to give the answer that I want to give. Exactly. And then I'm going to take that data and say, hey, look here, this proves what it is that I want. I mean, look, corporations, especially in the food and drug lane, have been doing that for years, right? They pay. That's why whenever I see a poll, whenever I see data, I'm like, who paid for it? Because that's going to tell me the bias that's within the data.
Or when you hear them say, people say, what people?
What people say that? Yes, exactly. They, right? The nameless, faceless they. Yes. And so it's interesting because I've always felt like it's truth versus facts, but I think it might be lowercase t, truth versus facts. Whereas if we can get to the uppercase truth, which is there's a vulnerability. There's almost like, if you think about in warrior culture, there is a code. We call it ethics in business, right? But there's a code by which all warrior cultures, and I think all businesses that are successful, I guess, for the long term, operate by.
Yeah.
And one of the very first codes in many, many warrior cultures is telling the truth. Capital T, truth, right?
Yes.
Being open and willing to face the sword, right? In essence, right? Of truth, because it cuts, and it cuts both ways.
Yep.
And so when we can tell the truth, and again, this is not something in corporate culture that is lauded, shall we say, right? Because everyone learns in the beginning, right? We talked about that yes, I'm eager. Yeah, I'm going to be the one to tell the truth and change it, Bulworth in politics and all that. And then we realize that the truth often gets us in trouble.
Yeah.
The truth often gets other people above us in trouble, who then get us in trouble, right? Who beat us down. And so in your experience, I mean, how are you able to start the inroads to people telling the truth, which makes that data believable, which makes that data accurate?
Yeah. So I swear I didn't pay you to ask me this question, but it's one of my favorite questions.
Great. Yeah, I love it.
So I think, you referred to ethics. In the work I do, I typically refer to those as your values, right? And organizations, a lot of companies have a mission, a vision, and a values. But when you look at those values, and many times they're also in tandem with behavioral competencies. So in one organization I've worked with, one of their values was speak with truth and kindness. So, we need to normalize being kind in the workplace. We need to normalize speaking truth. Now, you can speak truth with respect, with dignity, with kindness, and still nail the point you're trying to nail, right? Because what we have to flip our minds around is we attack problems, not people. And if you can speak your truth around attacking that problem, what does the data say about that problem? We're not talking about who caused it, that there's phrases in the workplace like whose throat to choke, right? Who's responsible? Why would you say that? That's horrible. But that's a very common saying in the world.
Yeah.
So you have to understand, how do you operationalize your values? Right? What does that mean? You have to clearly define them. So going back to clarity, clearly define values, because if
what are those?
Everybody who's watching today to define the word integrity or define the word ownership or truth, we would get all different versions of what that means. So as an organization or as an individual, you have to define what that value means to you. What does speaking truth with kindness mean to us as an organization? And then what does it mean if you do it, if you're overdoing it or underdoing it? So you're really creating, again, that infrastructure. You're creating that common language so that everybody in that organization, when somebody says, hey, so-and-so, I don't see you taking ownership of this the way I would like, you instantly know what that means and where you might need to adjust or focus, versus when you don't have that common language, you don't have that common ground and that foundation, you don't have anything to anchor it. You don't have a true north. And without a true north, to your statement earlier, you're never going to get there. Right? If you don't know who you are, you're never going to get there. So that clarity piece is so integral to everything we do within an organization, down to your values and really clearly defining what they mean, and then helping the rest of your organization understand that. Otherwise, they're just words on a wall, and it doesn't mean anything. And it's the paper you get at orientation. Welcome to X, Y, and Z company. Here's our values. We don't live by them, but here you go. In case an attorney ever asks you, you got them.
Yeah. And I'm sure especially the attorney part rings really true with HR. But what I hear you talking about reminds me of a leadership story. My father was chief of police in Atlanta, Georgia, in the early 90s, late 80s, early 90s. And he had this thing that he did, which was so interesting when it came to leadership. And he will always say, still says it, he says, I fire from the top down. And so what he meant by that was when he walked into, and he would always, he was the chief that was like on the ground, who would be like, if you were somewhere hiding at 2:00 in the morning, trying to get a little nap, and because he literally went from being all the way at the bottom, all the way to the top, held all the badges. And so he knew where all the hiding spots were. He knew where all the people napped. He knew that. And so if he showed up, for example, and 5 cops very stereotypically were in the donut shop, what he would do was he would walk in and ding, 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 the door would open and everyone would see him dressed in uniform. Everyone would see him and he'd just look, and they were all patrolmen, and he wouldn't yell. He wouldn't anything. He'd just be like, okay. And he'd say to the shop owner, back when you could do these kind of things, he said, I want you to lock this door. I want you to close up. And he would walk out and he would, with the cell phone that was this big, he would call the commanding officer for that zone. And he would have the commanding officer come down. And he would chew out the commanding officer. And he would say, if you don't get them right, I'm going to fire you.
Yep.
Right.
Yep.
And that was leadership from a way where instead of, again, attacking the people, as you so eloquently put it, he attacked the problem. The problem was a lack of leadership. The problem was a lack of that culture that said, these are the things that we live by, and these are the things that we, however it is, maybe figuratively, die by as well. And so what he was interested in was installing leadership that would guide those principles, those values. Yep. Not firing the people who were just doing what they were allowed to do, what they had been taught, trained, and educated to do by the people in leadership, which I think is such an interesting way. And so what you're talking about is exactly what a good leader, whether it's you, whether it's my father, whether it's someone in the C-suite level in corporate, does. It's they live the values. They show up every single day with the principles on their sleeve. Mm-hmm. And they're not upon high on the highest floor, sitting in an office necessarily telling there comes a point where you must do that, right? You must leverage that kind of stuff out. However, that being said, you have to create leaders within your network of executives that are going to go out and who are going to exhibit the values that you say you want your corporate culture to have.
Yeah, right. Because you have to be able to influence those leaders to grab onto something. They have to be able to anchor to something as well. So when you have those well-defined values, those well-defined ethical statements, whatever however you call it, then everybody knows that that's the expectation. And so then you can lead leaders of others to have that infrastructure, right? Standard work in an agile workplace isn't just for operations. Standard work exists throughout an organization, throughout anything, because you want to be able to scale and replicate it. So we have to understand that standard work doesn't box you in. It actually frees up your mind for innovation and creativity, because you've got that other stuff handled. Right.
And you said the I word, which I was thinking as you said it. And I think it's a challenge that we have both in the entrepreneurial space, in the performance space, in corporate space, and it's innovation. And is there a system by which those values that you hold upon high, that you are absolutely dead on when you say need to be a part of the corporate culture and need to be displayed every single day? Is there a way in a system, and it's like almost triangular, by which you can innovate or test those values, test those values, analyze the test of those values, and then innovate, incubate, come up with new ideas, new ways to then test the values, analyze. And I feel like there's a danger there in the corporate space from the conversations we've had, which is, I'm just going to write another policy, right? Yeah, which is like the no-no in corporate space, right? And I think that instead of innovation, and maybe that's a trap that people in your space fall into, where they think that innovation is just writing another policy, but writing another policy feels like starting over again, and just trying to patch something up, as
Yeah.
opposed
Right.
to really going back to saying, how can we, it's like, I don't know, it's like passing a new law, as opposed to going back and looking at the Constitution and saying, how does the actual framework hold up to where we are now? And I know that's a dangerous, dangerous
Right? I know,
conversation,
right?
right?
Be
But
careful with this one. No, you're spot on though, right? When you have this standard infrastructure
mhm,
and that common language, that foundation,
mhm,
and you apply agile methodology, which
mm,
says that you iterate as you go, and
yes,
it doesn't have to.
iterate.
Perfection does not exist, right? In
Right.
any form,
Yeah.
it doesn't matter. You can be at the top of your game. You can be, whomever. You can be Bezos
Mhm.
and be the wealthiest person, or Zuckerberg, or whatever.
Right.
But you're not perfect. And that's, I think, a key to a strong leader, is admitting that you're not perfect, but
Right.
it doesn't exist. So understanding that it's okay to make mistakes, take ownership of said mistakes, but what did you learn from them? And then
Mhm,
iterate and make it better. I think we can, in the corporate world anyway,
mhm.
folks get stuck by innovation because they think innovation has to be huge. It has to be
Mm,
total
that's why.
transformation,
Right.
right? And what I try to help people wrap their heads around is innovation can be something very small. And I use this example from, I worked at one of the world's largest organizations that ships stuff, very quickly to your home
Mhm,
over,
mhm.
whatever.
Right.
And so, hundreds of thousands of employees. And I was standing in one of the distribution centers watching somebody who was boxing items, and the trash can was off to the left. And so there was this repetitive twisting to throw, stuff in the trash can.
Right.
And he told me this story where they had moved and they were just getting ready to outfit all the workstations with this new change of taking the trash can from, say, 5 inches behind them to the left to up and underneath the table.
Mm.
And an employee recommended it because they were getting a repetitive injury from the
Stress injury, yeah.
twisting.
Yeah.
And when they took the trash can, moved it under the desk, and then they scaled that from a time study perspective, the company saved, now get this is crazy, and this was years ago, $17 million a day by moving a trash can
5 inches.
5 inches, because now they weren't having to twist, and it was intuitive, right? So
Mhm,
form follows function in
mhm,
this case. So they were doing what they were doing with their hands. They had the trash. Wouldn't it be easier just to
mhm.
drop it here instead of having to twist and throw it back there? So innovation, that's innovative, right? But we don't think
Right.
about moving a trash can as being innovative. We don't think about creating a ticketing system within the HR space and getting away from email as
Yeah.
innovative.
Yeah.
But it is, because you can then audit it and you can see our response times are within 24 hours, or we're outside of that and we need to tighten things up. There's so many things that exist that you can make just a little bit better. That's
Right.
innovation. It doesn't
Yes.
have to be, an iPhone.
Right. I
That's
mean,
not
that is,
innovative. Absolutely.
but that iPhone is a result of a massive amount of iterations, amount
Yes.
of innovate, right? That's the big result. And so what I hear you saying is, and it's true, it, instead of writing a new policy, aka an amendment to the
Yeah.
Constitution, which is darn hard to do in any sort of system, political or otherwise, it's about, how do we, and I'm sorry to do this,
It's
but
okay.
instead of trying to, baseball metaphor, instead of trying to step to the plate and hit a home run every single time, which is impossible, how do we hit singles? How do we learn to do these little things that are infinitely more scalable
And
over time?
impactful. Right.
Right, right, and then infinitely more especially over time. and impactful, like you say. How do we go about that in our lives? And the thing is that is how to affect massive change. I mean,
And
you
think
want to talk
about
about massive change? You talk about the the graph that goes like this and the
yes,
whatever. It's like, yeah, right. And incremental change, 1, 2, 3, 4 degrees a day over time, just like 5 inches over time, lead to massive gains. And yet
absolutely.
you avoid burnout. You
Yes.
avoid that sort of corporate fear that it's like, because look, I'm moving a trash can 5 inches, and maybe I have a line of 100 workers and I take 5 of them and I move it 5 inches, right? I'm not saying that all the factories should move the thing. No, I'm testing. I'm iterating, right? Testing in a small way that's manageable, where I can get data, right?
Yep.
I have 5 different kind of people, maybe with different kind of bodies, with different kind of arm length, right? To do all the testing. And then from there, you can actually make the scaling possible. And over time, it's just so huge. So I think that's something that we can do in our bodies with our diet, right? You don't have to completely become a vegan overnight, right? It's as simple as just adding a green smoothie. Eat McDonald's, great, do whatever you want. Maybe add a green smoothie, right? Add in something that is slight, that is just a bit of a difference, right? And again, across our spiritual connection, our relationships, our business, those tiny changes over time lead to massive gains.
Yes. And I think the other thing is that I think as a society, especially in the United States, we've gotten wrapped up in perfection. Social media hasn't helped us, right? And we look at images of people on Instagram and Facebook and TikTok.
They're not even real.
And right, supermodels don't even look like supermodels in real life, right? And you've interacted with enough celebrities to know the images we see are not the reality of the individuals. And so we get stuck in that, if it's not perfect, I can't do it. And this is something that plagues folks within the HR space. Yeah. And I've studied this over time. And one of the things I recognize is that there's a trauma that is associated with making mistakes in this space, oftentimes because our mistakes impact people's well-being in their lives, in that if payroll makes a mistake and somebody doesn't get their check, they don't pay their electric bill, it gets turned off, their kids, like there's these snowball effects that can happen when we make mistakes within the people space. Somebody's insurance doesn't get taken care of properly and they can't take their kid to the ER. Like, there's all of these really significant impacts for errors in the people space. If you're in marketing or sales or operations and you make a mistake on the line, it's not going to impact every employee in the company. But when you make a mistake in HR, the entire organization knows about it, right? So we've got to normalize that it's okay to make mistakes. And your approach and what you're saying from an iterative perspective is exactly the right way to do it, because you want to make this change. All right, well, test it with this small population, find out what's working and what's not working, and then go from there. And then see if you can expand it. And does it work with the next population? And does it work holistically? And can you scale it? There's all of those things that we have got to be okay with that traditionally we haven't been. And it takes conversations like this and people like you who have never been in HR to come in and talk to us about what you're doing. And then people like me who make the connections, right? And say, okay, guys, hear what he's saying. He's using different words, but it's exactly what we're dealing with on a day-to-day basis within the corporate world. So I know we talked about clarity, and we do have a little bit more time because I scheduled it until 1:30, assuming we would go a little bit long. But I want to make sure we get to the other C's, even if you go through them quickly. And I'm going to put your website up again.
Sure. Yeah. And that's the place where you can pre-order the book called Unshakable Confidence. It's justin.club. And so, I will go through them quickly because I do have another point that I need to get to. But I will say this: when it comes to clarity, right, we have our facts, and below that are, the way that I love to look at it is, okay, we have our facts and then we have our feelings, right? How do we feel about that? Because that gets us again to the truth. We're looking for the truth of how we feel. And then from there, I love to go to the focus. Okay, based on the facts and our feelings about them, what has our focus been? Have we been focused on fear? Have we been focused on avoiding those sort of trauma? And then the final piece of clarity is, what is the fruit? It's on my F's, right? Facts, feelings, focus, fruit. And what are the outcomes of that, right? Let's look at, and it's really based on where we are now, right? What are the facts of where we are? How has that made us feel? What has our focus been that has led us to where we are? And then what are the outcomes that we have? Do we like those outcomes? What do we want to change? Which then gives us a clarity on the future. And we run that same system with the future, because then what we've done is we've taken where we are now and where we want to be, and we've opened up this gap.
Yes.
And within that gap is where most people fall into the pit, right? The pit of despair, the oubliette, whatever you want to call it, right? And yet we can build a bridge between where we are and where we want to be that allows us to not fall off, because we can leap, right? We can leap and have all the faith we want in the world, which is a beautiful thing. But ultimately, if we don't have a pathway and or a bridge to get us there, gravity takes hold, life starts smacking us around, right? And those things, something in our body, something in our relationships, maybe our connection and our certainty in ourselves or in our business goes clack, right? And slaps us down. So what is that bridge then? The bridge becomes the next C, which is commitment. And that is a powerful tool. It's the definition of our commitment. It is deciding, which the Latin root of means to cut off from, to say, I am committed. This is where I am going. This is how I am doing it. And there will be no other options. And take that with a grain of salt. And then the most powerful thing that we can do when we make a commitment is to declare that commitment. Two things that we can do. Declare that commitment. Because I can sit here and say, yeah, I'm going to do 100 push-ups a day. Sure. And that's between me and me, right? Me and me can make that decision. But if I then go and I use the tool of social media, not to show my highlight reel only, but to actually then make a declaration that says, hey, I'm going to do this. I'm going to do that. I am scared as heck. I need you all to hold me accountable. Then we can, or my friends, whatever, whomever it is, right? Then there is an accountability there that we often lack on our way to that dream place, that thing that we consider a dream, our future version of ourselves, right? And then once we've made that declaration, we then direct our forces, our resources, and our focus on that commitment. Again, daily wins, small victories. From there, once we have actually made the commitment to do something, that's when we get to play. And you know what? It's so funny, and I know you as an artist as well can understand this, is that actors, we forget, singers, entertainers, we forget that our whole job is to play. We get paid to do what most people do in their imaginations and or children do just because, right? Yes. And yet that same sort of idea, that same sort of feel can come into the corporate space, because underneath our creativity, the first subcategory of that is play, right? We play because that opens up the pathway to us understanding our process. When we give ourselves the ability to play, and I know in corporate culture that can be so, but like it's that iteration, it's that innovation, it's that let's brainstorm, let's play. Then that allows us to work on process. And in that process, we then learn how to protect ourselves within that process and build a process to protect us, to help us manage ourselves, to help us manage the process so that we then can lead people can lead ourselves, we can lead ourselves. And then as we figure out that creativity, as we play, as we create the process, as we protect ourselves, then we can begin to push the boundaries. That's my finding there, right? We push our boundaries.
Which is interesting, because when you think about it, none of that happens if you're not exposing yourself and leaning into vulnerability,
Yeah.
which is scary as hell.
Yes, especially in a corporate space, because you get fired like that sometimes
Right.
if you step out of line.
You can get fired, or you can, one of the things that happens with organizations, especially organizations that have been around for a long time, they may not fire you, but you will be judged on that mistake for the rest of your career at that company.
Ugh.
One of my clients right now, they have a highly tenured population. People have worked there for like 35, 40 years. And I'll be in conversation with them and I'll say, well, what about, Sally over here? She looks like she's got a lot of what it takes to be a strong leader. And they're like, oh, well, blah, blah, blah. And I'm like, well, when did that happen? Oh, that was about 15 years ago. Do we think that maybe Sally's grown a little bit since then? Like,
Yeah.
Go. But there's that it just is what we do as people, is people make an impression upon us, and that's what we hold on to forever. That's, that first impression or whatever it is. So that vulnerability is really hard sometimes in the corporate world, because it's not just the fear of being fired. It's that stigma that you'll carry with you forever that you've got to shed. Right. Yeah. And as a performer, you can get stereotyped, right? And you're this one note type of performer, not you personally, but what happens, right? There are some actors and actresses out there who they basically play the same character in every TV show, in every film, with everything they do, right? Yeah, totally. And so that can happen to us in the corporate world too. Right? You're the cheerleader, or you're the heavy, or you're the grim, like you're hired, you hire them, you fire them, whatever it is, right? So it happens on both sides. We could talk about this for days. I know you've got someplace to go.
I do have one more thing.
Yes, tell us, please.
Just the last bit, because I think it kind of ties a bow on everything. So we talked about clarity, we talked about commitment, we talked about creativity, and the last C, which is probably the most important thing, C, that comes from all of this work, is that thing that we want the most, which is that certainty. That belief that we are on the right path, that we are in some sort of control, greater or lesser, whatever it may be, of the direction of our lives, our career. And the 4 C's that come under that are consistency. Consistency.
Huge.
Consistency is huge, right? Being able to have that clarity, that commitment, that creativity, and to consistently employ it every single day. And then when we're in that consistent space, being able to course correct. Being able to, for example, like when the plane leaves from New York and goes to LA, it's never in a straight line. There are storms that happen. It gets blown off course by the jet stream. Somewhere over, I don't know, Omaha, they're off course. The pilots don't come on saying, I'm sorry, ladies and gentlemen, we're off course. We have to turn the plane around. No, they never do that. They never do that. Never at all. Like, they just adjust and they course correct based on whatever they need to do in order to get where they need to go.
Right.
And then the last 2 things, which again are so vital and lead to that certainty, are being able to compound our victories, compound that work, and to recognize that, hey, I started here a month ago, and now all of a sudden, look, just 30 days later, I'm here, and the clarity, the commitment, the creativity, and the consistency that I've shown has led to a compound effect. Recognizing that, and then ultimately celebrating it.
I love that.
Celebrate our victories enough, don't we?
No, and it's, I mean, the parallels to the folks within HR who are watching are really unbelievable. And I swear we did not script this at all. Nope. But another area that I share with folks is that we do not market the work we do very well in HR. We just don't. Yep. We are that humble, like we're the behind the scenes and we're the, whatever. We've got to do a better job of celebrating the victories and letting people know about them. Like I'll use payroll as an example, which is definitely a more tactical area of HR for sure. And definitely not my strong suit, but does anybody ever call the payroll team and say, hey, thank you. I got paid every payday this year. I appreciate
Yeah,
you.
no.
Right? So their excellence is when you don't ever have to contact them.
Yeah.
Versus other, or, marketing, they get huge accolades for this amazing campaign they launched and the sales, right? All this great stuff. We don't get that because our success and our victories are often preventative, right? And they're often prophylactic in a way so that we prevent the things from ever happening, but that doesn't get the attention. But if we don't market it ourselves, right? If we don't say, hey, you know what? The great resignation is about to happen. We estimate 40% of the workforce is going to be changing companies. We minimize that. And we only had a 15%, attrition rate. That's huge. But do we market it? No. So I love what you said, because we've got to celebrate those victories, and it's like compounding interest. One begets the next, right? And it's something that we just don't do a good job of. We really don't. So I love it. We could talk about this forever, and maybe we'll have a chance to do it again, because I just want our community to hear what you have to say. And I know we've talked about building some programs together, which I think would be amazing. Just quick fire round before you go. What has been your favorite Broadway show that you were in?
Woo! My favorite Broadway show is called In Transit. It was Broadway's first a cappella musical. And what made it so special for me is that everything was a cappella. It was very hard on the voice because I sang 90 out of 100 minutes of the show, and many of us went down, and it's just like a cappella, but for maybe people who don't know, a cappella is like a family where you're all linked arm in arm. And if one person goes down, it affects the entire family and the sound and everything. But it was so gorgeous because we were the transition music. We were the underscoring to scenes. I mean, it was
wow. So you didn't even have backup cast to do.
Oh, we do. Yeah, we do. But again, it's like when you plug in different players into an a cappella group, it changes the entire sound. And so it just was a wild, wild experience. But that's definitely been my favorite for sure.
That's amazing. Okay. Who have you met that you've been the most starstruck by?
Woof. Who have I met that I've been the most starstruck by? That's wild because I don't get super starstruck. I will say that when I was younger, I think probably in my 20s, and I'd met a lot of famous people by this point, but I think Paula Abdul, when I was auditioning for American Idol, definitely was, because she's forever our girl. And so I was just like, that was it.
That's awesome. Who have you met that's made the biggest impression on your career? Celebrity or other? It doesn't have to be celebrity.
Sure. On my career, who have I met who's made the biggest? Wow. I'll say one of the people I've met, and there's a lot of them, but he just sticks out to mind for me. I had a conversation with Lionel Richie, and one of the greatest things that he told me was, fame doesn't change you. It magnifies what's going on in your life. And I've kept that with me because it's so true. Success doesn't change you. It magnifies what's going on in your life.
Good, bad, or indifferent, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, I love that. I like that a lot. I'm going to have to remember that.
Yeah.
All right. Well, I thank you, Justin, so much. This has been wonderful. I am excited. I know some of our folks have messaged me about us and the song that we've talked about doing. We didn't fully talk about how we met, but I ended up singing for Justin in a clubhouse room.
It was awesome.
I still can't believe I did. But we, just so everybody knows, we are working on something. We are going to figure it out. And we will get something, and hopefully we'll do another one of these sessions and bring you guys something really amazing. Because I just, the parallels are just uncanny. Like the more we talk about it, I'm like, oh my gosh, there's so much that our folks could benefit from. So I want to just thank you so much. Appreciate all that you've shared with us today. Your program, your book comes out in August, correct? Your Unshakeable Confidence is coming out in August. So again, everybody go to justin.club. I'll put it back up here.
Cheers. Yeah, thank you.
And, if anybody's looking for a confidence coach, my friend, I got to point this way. There you go. I can definitely, you're pretty active on Instagram. You're building your following on LinkedIn. So there's lots of ways to reach out to Justin. And thank you, my friend. It's been wonderful.
Thank you so
All right,
very much,
everybody.
Bonnie.
We'll
Bye,
see you
everybody.
soon. Bye.